Hello, I'm Eva Díaz, and this is the Brooklyn Book Festival. I want to welcome our two guests for tonight's discussion, Jerry Saltz and Darby English. Darby English is a professor of art history at the University of Chicago and a consulting curator at MoMA in New York. Jerry Saltz is senior art critic at New York Magazine and the winner of the 2018 Pulitzer Prize in Criticism. We are here to discuss two recent publications by these authors, Jerry's How to Be an Artist, which came out earlier this year, and Darby's To Describe a Life, Notes from the Intersection of Art and Race Terror, which came out in 2019. I'll begin with you, Darby. This book emerged from a series of lectures you delivered in 2016 at Harvard, but they seem galvanized above all by the Black Lives Matter movement. Can you describe the origin of the book and the stakes for you in writing these essays then?
Sure. So I received the invitation to give the Cohen lectures at Harvard in I think was about 2 years ahead of time. So it was the summer or so of 2014. And I remember one of the first efforts I made to think about what the writing that would lead to the lectures would be about was something that I was, it was an effort that I was undertaking while I was responding along with everyone else in the world to the shooting death of Michael Brown in Ferguson. And I found that my thinking about my job as a teacher, as a researcher, as a historian, as a citizen, was so deeply informed by my reactions to that moment that I needed to find a subject that would allow me to continue thinking about the moment and get the job done, which was to deliver a trilogy of lectures, you know, in a pretty august situation in a very prestigious place with too much formality and all kinds of stuff that really turns me off and makes me anxious. I didn't want to think in a Harvard friendly way about my life. I mean, I was having to think about my existence as a Black man in the United States, and who's also a scholar who thinks about representation at a moment where it was as hard as it had ever been. So I turned to art, not in search of subjects, but actually just in search of solace. That's what I do when I need calming. I need to direct my thinking, direct my feeling. And I found my subjects there in a number of objects that ended up being the subjects of the lectures, which then in a later stage became the subjects of the 4 book chapters on the introduction. And, you know, it was actually, that was the first Black Lives Matter moment. It was before that movement got the recharge that it got at the end of May with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Arbery and others. So, you know, it was a different moment in the life of that movement that book responds to. And there are distinctions to be drawn between what I wrote then and how I would approach the same questions now, but like maybe we could talk about those later.
Yeah, I do, and let's keep that on the table. And so, Jerry, I want to turn to you. Your book began as a feature in New York Magazine and was then expanded into its current form. What motivated you to take on this topic, how to be an artist, in the welter, as you call it, of the many persistent, strange, and even scary issues that art raises?
Thanks, Eva. Thanks, Darby. Great to be here on a Sunday night when our president is driving around in a little motorcade outside his museum, outside of his hospital. So have I ruined the night? Yeah. Okay. So the article, I began as an artist, but I am a failed artist. I have no degrees. I never graduated any schools. I was a wise guy who just couldn't do anything because I thought I knew better. I was an artist for about 10 years. Then I listened to the demons, the same demons that all of us here, writers, artists, everybody really, like, you can't do this. You don't know what you don't have enough money. You didn't go to the right schools. Your ankles are no good. You don't know how to schmooze. You don't know whatever it is. And behold, I listened to those demons in my 20s, and I stopped making art and really self-exiled. And I became a long distance truck driver. I think maybe the only Jewish one out there, but I was out there. I had a CB radio, and my handle was the Jewish cowboy. And I would get on and go, "Shalom, partner." And they never spoke to me. They had me marked in every bar, in every truck stop. In any event, the book, which is small so you can read it, um, was a note to my younger self. The self that was in these trucks, Eva, that I became more and more miserable and depressed. I loved art. I loved being around it. I loved the art world. As dysfunctional as it is, it's my dysfunctional family. It's my only family. It's, I love it. I hate it. It's a note to my younger self of how to get through those dark nights of the soul, and then how I reinvented myself at the age of 40, older than both of you probably, to write the first. I've never written a word in my life. I am still a terrible, slow reader, and learned to write, and then decided to identify my audience, which I didn't want just to be the inside, hand-shooked art world. I knew right away I wanted to write for the reader, because honestly, I trained myself to be an art critic by reading Art Forum, it's like the bride's magazine of the art world, right? You have to look at it, and it freaks me out, and I love it, but I actually understood very, very little of, like, the late capitalist simulacra of the monochromatic I didn't know what it was talking about. And I decided just to write, not for those 155 people that at that time in the early 90s had a death grip, in a sense, on the art world that still is there. And that's what the book comes from. And it's really for just getting to work, you big babies, of like, yes, we're afraid. And it's, 100 and some pages to get you out of your own belly button. And it will work. I'm sorry, I'm done. I think you guys need to talk about real serious stuff where I'll just sort of get you out of hell.
I'm sorry. I'm taken by the last thing you said. It's 100 pages to get you out of your personal hell, and it will work. I want to know how
How to be an artist?
how did you decide that? I can't think of many art critics who became gurus, but it sounds like you've managed to make the turn.
I always loved, you guys may not know who this is, an English woman named Sister Wendy. Does that name mean anything?
Yeah.
Or Bob Ross, who used to paint on TV.
Happy
Or
Little Trees.
what? Yeah.
Happy Little Trees.
I'm going to make one. And by the way, I still want, you work at MoMA. I want to curate a show. He doesn't work at MoMA. Okay. I do want to, I know where all the Bob Ross paintings are, and I very much would like to curate a very small show. Anyway, I don't know what made me do it other than I made my weakness a strength, just like all of us do. And my weakness was I did not have all of the training, the art history, the nomenclature. So I thought I'll just write about everything I've ever learned about art from looking at it for 40 years, and every artist that ever taught me anything, which is 90% of what I learned. So that's why I think it could work.
Thank you.
How I want to follow up on what Eva asked Darby, though. How would 2019 BLM be how would you address 2020 BLM different? You said it's changed, which I think we all understand, but how? Urgency, blood, what is going on?
Popular reach. I would say that by comparison to the manifestation that had taken place by the time I gave those lectures in the first 3 days of November of 2016, and today, BLM has become a popular movement.
Yeah.
It went from being a fringe movement, a subcultural movement with a strong hashtag and some good press, to being a popular movement, and to beginning at least to cross racial lines that were not as readily or as visibly being crossed in that earlier moment. And I just think it's a very different context now. Like you have, when you talk about BLM, you have a question of representation actually has become central to it.
What do you mean a question of, I'm sorry, Eva, I'm curious though, what do you mean by a question of representation? I think our audience wants to know that.
Sure. What I mean in very particular is that when you say that you are a member or an affiliate of the movement, your ability to be, like your right to be unchallenged in saying that, I think is more circumspect in 2020 than it was in 2016, because it's a larger thing. It's more encompassing, it's more inclusive. People of many more skin tones and skin colors and races and identities are ready to claim it or to take positions against it than were ready in those ways in 2016. It's a matter of scale. You know, it has scaled, which things do in capitalism. It has scaled. It has become consumable. It has become a relatively ubiquitous presence in the spectacle, in the mediascape. And therefore it's available to more minds and to more permutations of representation than it was in that earlier time. It was a more discrete object then, so I could invoke it and people knew exactly what it meant. They didn't have to dwell on it. Now I think as soon as I brought it up, I'm sure it would say, well, who do you mean? Do you mean the one that's all black from Boston, the original? Do you mean the one? It's very contested in Kansas City. That's throwing a lot of white people out because that, so it's an easier book. It's an easier book to write before that that scale shift takes place. Does that make sense?
A lot of sense. Yeah. Eva?
Well, there was a bout of shyness, modesty, and alarm when I asked our two authors if they would read aloud sections from their books. But I personally enjoy considering the way the prose is constructed, the arguments are set forward in a book by hearing the words themselves. So though Jerry and Darby demurred reading their own words out loud, at the risk of irritating our guests, I want to read short sections from their respective works for you, the audience, with a question to each of them that I'll ask to follow. So this passage I'm going to read is from Jerry's How to Be an Artist, which is constructed around aphoristic, very short chapters. And this, what I'll read, is the entirety of chapter 43. Even though the art world can look like an orgy of glamorous openings, record-setting auction prices, lifestyle features, avaricious rapaciousness, remember that only 1% of 1% of 1% of all artists get rich from their artwork. You may feel overlooked, under-recognized, and underpaid. There's no getting around it. Being poor is hard. And probably 95% of all artists are just scraping by. Among the artists I've met, though, those who maintain a network of support all live a life that keeps the mind nimble and young, the spirit alive, their art growing and enriching themselves and others who are fortunate enough to see it. We all struggle, but art lets us plumb even this struggle, makes us clear-eyed about matters of class and social inequity. I'm a writer. I've spent much of my life stone broke, yet I've never regretted the life I've made, happy amid all this art. Nor have I ever met an artist who regretted being an artist, as difficult as the life can be. This is why Isaac Dinesen could write in Babette's Feast that, quote, a great artist, mesdames, is never poor, end quote. So this seems extremely prescient, Jerry, in our moment. Could you talk about what changes you're seeing in this dramatic pivot, one could say euphemistically, of the last few months in terms of the production side of the field of art?
Right. First of all, I did not hate what you read. I love how you read it. The word rapaciousness. If my editor is listening to this, that should have gone.
Avaricious rapaciousness.
Yeah, no, twice. Avaricious, good. That's already pushing it. God, Jesus. You write a whole book, you can never use the same word twice. It is a pain when you write magazine articles because they don't let us do that. I don't know if you guys are allowed, but Jesus. Look, the art world in the last 5 or 10 years, while it was changing under Obama, in that era, it really did have a project that really took more and more form because of critics like both of you that were redefining art history, really, totally redefining it. Museums are very, very slow, but people like you were forcing the museum's hand while people like me stood on the sideline writing about that, cheering what we liked, not liking what we didn't. But the art world at the same time became more and more obsessed with the 1% of the 1% of the 1%, and very few critics were covering the 99% of the shows I was seeing. And instead, we would hear about auction prices, best at the art fair, which mega gallery was hoovering up what artist, who went out last night. That's what I mean. And I live a lot on social media. Please follow me at Jerry Saltz. Don't post dogs or food. And I noticed what I've known my whole life. All those people, all of us, we like that art. I liked a lot of Jeff Koons and Rudy Stingel and whoever, but we don't need to always be writing on the same things, people. And so what this was about the conditions in a way that we've been forced into since the middle of March, that art in a way has returned to what it was 40,000 years ago, where you are writing, making art, cooking, taking care of the kids, watching Nana, beating down the dog. I hate dogs, I like cats. All in the same room. When the studio, the kitchen, the pharmacy, life was lived in one small room, and art was being made out of things at hand, out of themselves. And what's really changed, the culture is changing at 1,000,000 miles an hour or not. Maybe America's only becoming more of what it already was before all this, which is what happened after 2001, or people are making art out of whatever's around their desk, but inside their content is really being supercharged. And I think that the production of art, I've not met one artist that said, nah, I'm just waiting this thing out. You know what I mean, Eva? You live around art and artists, and they're not waiting this out. But nor, and then I'll finish, do you have to make a portrait of Donald Trump or George Floyd. Subject matter alone does not make your art relevant. It's you, how you embed your thought in material that makes art relevant. And you must do that in an original way to cut through all the noise.
Thank you. So Darby, it's your turn.
Yay.
So I'll read a moving passage from the introduction to your book. You're criticizing here what you call the simplification of difference offered to us as proposals of our present. I'm just going to wait until the siren goes by.
I love that. New York or whatever city you're in.
Yeah, Rockaway. Rockaway.
Rockaway.
All right, Doppler effect. Here we go. So you are criticizing the simplification of difference offered to us as proposals of our present, and you write, such proposals come to feel. Sorry, more sirens. Such proposals come to feel like a way or a reason not to maintain contact with the distinctive textures of noun, a feel for our continual spread, variegation, and other effects of what elsewhere I have called discomposure, in a gesture toward what flows and overflows between and beyond the stuff that our race words name. Such proposals would fit an increasingly rangy and discontinuous cluster of Black experiences into a tiny poetical carapace. Sustained contact with discomposure, on the other hand, dictates attention to the actual cultural and political effectiveness of, for instance, the dwindling social authority of the color line amid multiracialization, strategic and non-strategic misappropriations of racial Blackness all over the culture, and the pervasive decoupling of Black practitioners from so-called conventionally Black practices. Discomposure requires an interracial aesthetics, one agile enough to follow the dictates of desire and play, and willing to track the erosion of established cultural forms and logics. To think with discomposure is to know the untidiness of racial reconciliation, especially when things get hot. Thinking with discomposure attempts not to yammer on further about various problems of meaning, a shameful concession, but rather to sit hard with and listen to what fights meaning and how. So, could you talk, Darby, about discomposure in art and the ways in which it's proposing a contingency around secure meanings, but at the same time, how you want this discomposure to still be a recognition of the many fundamentally determining powers that have been sustaining injustice and racial inequality?
Wow. Thank you for reading that. Talk about a passage that needs to make sure that my editor isn't listening. I've written a lot of pages about discomposure, both before those and after it, and not to make excuses at all for anything that we just heard. It's a thought that I've decided to stay with until I figure out what I mean by it. So I'll begin by saying that it's not something that I really consider to be something that happens in art, as much as it is a word that I dragged out of the obsolete department of the dictionary of the English language in order to describe the gradual, but I think irreversible dismantling of the life ways, the ways we live in relation to racial categories, and other social categories. It's something that interracial coupling in an intimate, or like whether it's a sexual intimacy or a non-sexual intimacy, brings about. It's something that I think discomposure is happening whenever artists of different colors and backgrounds produce something together. Whether it's a plastic thing with a sturdy, durable, permanent physical outcome, or an idea, or a platform, or a forum, or a context. It's any formation that is the result of an attempt to create in mixture, where people come from the differences that define all of us in relation to each other and to ourselves, come from at least two different places, and something happens. Whether or not that thing has happened before, whether or not it's original, if it's coming out of an interaction between ostensibly different parties, it's significant. It's not on me, it's not the kind of thing I choose to do, to say or to legislate or judge what the significance is. I just want to point to the event of significance in order, as often as I can, as directly and as clearly as I can, in order to get as many eyes on the situation as we can bring to bear. Because it's not only the act of creating out of mixture that makes something like discomposure interesting. It's the dialogues that we have about it and the way that those dialogues feed concepts that are still developing in historical time. So practice, we know people change, practices change, but it's only in dialogue and reflection and communication and attempts to produce knowledge that knowledge changes. So that requires a lot of things. I focus on the attention to events of discomposure or whatever you want. It's fine to say events of mixture. Anything that refuses separation, anything that says, separation, no thanks, is doing discomposure in the sense that I intended in those pages. And I'm still uneasy about the fact that it's not a drugstore word. I really wish it were, because it would be helpful to have a drugstore word. I need for my reader to understand that I'm not trying to hide. I'm not interested in academic mystification at all. I'm not interested in that at all. I'm not interested in suggesting that I'm talking about something for which you need a special language in order to be in this dialogue with me at all. I'm a word person, and I'm extremely persnickety about meaning what I say when I'm talking to other people about something that I consider true. I just couldn't find another term. If it takes, I assume it'll be many, many decades after my expiration, but it may not. It may not, but it came to me, it might be helpful to know that it came to me. I was in a cafe. I'll make this short because there's a long version of this story, but I don't want to go on too long. But I was listening to a song that changed me.
What song?
Okay, so I was listening to a cover of Bridge Over Troubled Water recorded by Roberta Flack.
Covers do things.
Exactly, covers do things. Covers are formations, and formations are complicated. They have to be dismantled and described piece by piece. Roberta Flack covered Bridge Over Troubled Water in the same year that song was on the top of the charts, as written for Art Garfunkel to sing by Paul Simon. Roberta covered it in an incredibly slow and beautiful orchestral arrangement with backing vocals from the Newark Boys Choir. It is completely another animal from the song that we all know from malls and jukeboxes in our parents' cars or wherever it is. Movies, God knows how many movies by now. Zach Braff probably directed all of them. But I'm listening to that song and that version of that song, and having it happen the way that it did when it did, it meant that I had never heard Roberta's version before. I didn't know it existed. So I felt, I'm below my brain. I'm in a cafe, the music is above me and my brain. I felt this song, this version, burrowing up into my idea of what that song was, which was a very white, gentle, safe, kind of soft, political, liberal anthem of the late 60s, of the early 70s. It's a wonderful piece of music, but it's a weak cultural product. Let's put it that way. That versioning, that cover by Roberta Flack changed it completely. And I had, therefore, from that day forward, to think of that song as at least two things. And, the audacity of taking a song at the height of its power as a cultural phenomenon, as a Billboard charts topping thing, and doing it your way with an inimitable voice. I mean, a voice like Smokey Crystal. I mean, she could sing the phone book, as we say about a lot of people, and it would be immaculate. But doing it then made something out of that song. It to me represented an understanding of what could be done with art, both Roberta's art and the existing art of that song in the cultural imagination. Discomposure was happening at that moment. And every time that song is heard by someone that version is heard by someone who knows Paul Simon's version for Art Garfunkel, discomposure happens again. If this interactive part of it that I'm talking about is recognized, not if it isn't recognized. Nothing happens except maybe another version of a song, or maybe it's the only version you know. Maybe you only know Roberta's version. That's possible too. Anyway.
That is very beautiful. It explains to me why I only listen to covers. I think the covers are discomposure in that they are different times getting together, or different genders, or different races, estuary-like things that Darby is discussing, that Eva works on in her own work, that it's not simple. And I love that, first of all, you use the word yammer, so that never could be academic. And second of all, I think it's a beautiful kind of metaphor for I don't like things that are separation, as you said. In its negative, I think you made it very clear, because that's purity. And purity is real, real bad. And we see the death of the white race, the sort of Moby Dick, American Pequod, trying to hold on to just that last vestige of purity. And it doesn't go away easy. I mean, what you're talking about,
yeah, it's a fucking awful word.
Well, I liked it when you were saying it, but I just forgot it again. Discomposure. No, yeah. It's good. It's good.
It's a pharmaceutical name. It's a terrible word.
I use words like rapacious. So. I love that you read our work, Eva. Two scaredy cat writers.
Yes, there was.
Because writers are always writing and editing. They hear. If I heard my own work out of this mouth, I would feel proud and ashamed.
Yeah. Well, we're always looking for the right word. Writers. So we
have
a question. We have a question from the Crowdcast, which I should mention to those in the audience that there is ability for you to ask questions to our panelists. So we have one that I'll pose to you all. This is from Preston. What effect do you think Black Lives Matter and movements like Change the Museum, Instagram will push to real change and diversity in the art world? Or will it just continue to follow the money?
Darby, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You are actively working on this, as is Eva. It
depends on the museum in question. If if trustees, directors, chief curators, heads of departments are listening to the chorus beyond their walls, and crucially making distinctions, making judgments about what they're hearing, and not just going in for everything coming from a certain demographic, then I think it makes sense to expect change of some kind in some term. I don't think near, but maybe you could expect to see something and feel something different in these institutions coming off of them in our lifetimes. I think however, if people in the positions like the ones I just named are not listening, or are only listening to one section of the chorus, you'll see change, but you probably won't be very convinced by it.
I think that Darby is right. I think that many museums are instituting internal structural change. And this, paradoxically, ironically, compels them towards more and more change. And they therefore have a kind of a Trojan horse thing. They have the changers are now on the inside of the museum, and the people, this is the Whitney Museum's problem. Too many museums are acting like the Republican Party. They are rotten. They have paid a lot of lip service to social concerns, racial concerns, structural change. They've talked the talk, but they have not done the hires. And the museums that have, say, like the Whitney, the New Museum, whatever, ironically, they are the ones that are the most attacked by the world because they're actually the most vulnerable, while places, big institutions, they talk the talk and over-index just one kind of artist or one kind of art. And so they are virtue signaling, but inside, the jobs are still held down, locked tight, and people like anybody here not getting in, and they gotta go. I am no longer an incrementalist about this. I'm old. I want to see more museums make the hire. If they do mediocre shows, I don't care. The all-white curators and all-white directors have already done mediocre shows. It doesn't seem to destroy art history. We will get it right, especially with the cover idea that Darby's talking about. What's original in the content that Darby is talking about is different voices, people coming from different places working on the same thing. That is very original content, even if it's just a painting of Trump. Because of who made it, that does change things. So museums, your time has come. Mine has too. All of us that are old, and it's hard. I don't want to give up my job. People say you have to give up your power. I always say, well, I'm poor. That's not a good excuse, but I see it as my art, my job, my livelihood, and I'm writing as hard as I can in the meantime. So am I guilty of what I'm accusing them of? I don't think so, because they're taking public money and serving gigantic audiences, and they are talking the talk, but not walking the walk.
Well, it does seem like we're in a moment where the scrappier museum, which is limber as to its concerns, would be preferable to the, as you said, the ginormous trustee-driven, kind of behemoth of, especially capital campaigns that afflict these museums in which money is raised just to perpetuate the institution. That might get us to the sort of elephant in the living room, at least in terms of this week's art news with the Philip Guston topic. Darby, you had mentioned it when we corresponded, and I had read your what you wrote in the Times last week. And when I was reading Jerry's book, he had just coincidentally published one of those very Guston paintings with the Klan. And just to give context to those in our audience, Philip Guston was a muralist in the 1930s doing representational work, switched to abstraction in the 1950s, and then went back to representation in the late 1960s and had a very political he was really a good lefty. His work on the Klan, using images of the Klan, and then later by the 80s doing things about the Sandinistas, for example, and CIA intervention in Central America. So his show, retrospective, that was supposed to happen over 4 institutions, including the National Gallery in Washington, was postponed to 2024 by these institutions. There's the the Guston in your book. And so, maybe we can talk about that in terms of these issues of institutions self-protection and what kinds of, their claims of not being able to provide enough context for his leftism, I suppose, was the issue, which seems perverse. I don't know if Darby, if you want to go first, since you wrote about it, and then I think Jerry can follow up.
Which part of the question?
In terms of your feeling, as many have, that this cancellation's a bad thing.
Yeah.
Or postponement, I should say.
It feels like a missed. Right. There's the 1930 drawing print that was withdrawn from the exhibition and agreed to be withdrawn before, actually well before, many months before the conversation that led to
this too.
Yeah, I just think it's a terrible missed opportunity. I think and that's not all I think. I have a lot of thoughts about it, but I to be very frank about it, I think people with tremendous leverage in the conversation about what kind of capacity will be available to museums when they present and program work right now, people in the foundation world, were able to exhibit or exercise outsized influence over the decision ultimately taken by the directors, and I think it was an example of outsized influence exerted, unchecked, because that's what outsized means. It's hard to check by nature, just because we're talking about a foundation with a $15 billion in January capitalization and or endowment. And
which museum are you referring to?
I'm referring to the Ford Foundation.
Right. Oh, that right. Okay.
So the foundation on which a great deal of decision making at the National Gallery, at least, approval, approbation, whatever you like, it's machine, the cogs in the machine turn smoother if people at Ford are happy.
I think it's a shit show, and I think it represents museums as Mitch McConnell just trying to freak out, and in this case, just like say, oh, if we show this work with the KKK in it, they might notice that we have all white directors. All the curators are white. 12 of the 14, people in the catalog are white. And all the great work by the curators, to say nothing of the greatness of Guston. I mean, really, to say nothing of the art, all of it they threw away. And I say, tear them down, not the museum. These people have to go. And I'm glad. This is the one part of the delay that I actually think is fine. I think that just yanks the curtains back, that there's no question that they caved to whatever the pressures, whether it was people like me even over listening to Darren Walker, the head of the Ford Foundation. But really, as soon as I heard the directors were doing this, it was crystal clear. They haven't been showing artists of color, enough women, blah, 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 blah. They knew what was coming for them, and they ducked it. And now they're caught out. But of course, we lose the show. I can wait a few years.
Yeah.
It's sad to have to do it, but usually when we talk about censorship, we talk about those people being censored that have no voice. We, as poor as we are relatively in our idiot world, we have a voice. So I could not stand up for those with voices. I would like to stand up for the people with no voices and hope that in 4 years, both of you are a little more pessimistic than I am. Might change. I think this forces their hand, or I'd like to think so.
Well, I'm getting notices that we are out of time, but I really want to thank both of you so much for your time and thank the audience for their attention and their questions. And everyone have a good night.
Yeah,
Bye.
thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Brooklyn Books.